Hi everyone. This week we're going to talk about sampling. Sampling is when we pick who it will be in our study. So there's the population, which are all the people that could potentially be in our study. And then there's the sample, which are the people that we choose to be in our study. So for example, if we were going to study teenage youth who were in a group home, in California, all of the teenage youth who are in group homes would be considered the population. And then we would maybe choose 50 to 100 of them to be in our sample. There are two different types of sampling, non-probability and probability sampling. We're going to talk about non-probability sampling first. Non-probability sampling is used when it's not possible to get a random sample. And you learned about random sample in your statistics class. So there's four types of non-probability sampling we're going to talk about. And non-probability sampling are often used in social work because it's difficult for us to access clients. And so we frequently use non-probability sampling. Now, what that means is that it's more difficult for us to generalize our results to the population. When I say generalize, what I mean is apply the results from our sample to the population. So, for example, let's say I do an intervention with my sample of group home participants and find that it works really well. Well, if I use non-probability sampling, then I have to be very cautious about saying, since this worked really well with my sample, it will work really well with all of the group home youth in California. Okay, so that's what we mean when we say generalizing. The first kind of non-probability sampling that is frequently used is called availability sampling or convenience sampling. This is the most common used in social work because it's a group that we can access. So for example, with our group home, let's say we have a friend who's working at a group home and we want to study the group home youth, and so we say to our friend, I'd like to study these youth, can we talk to the director and see if I can get permission? And then they get permission from the parents and permission from the youth. And that's an availability sample. This group was available to you. Okay. Now you have to be careful because they may not be representative of the population. There may be something unique about this group of youth that are living in this specific house. And so they may not represent the whole population of youth that are living in group homes. So you have to be careful when you generalize. The next kind is purposive sampling. This is when you hand pick a sample because you think it might represent the population. This is frequently used for pre-test use. And it's also used if you want to select an atypical sample. So let's say there's something unique about a group, a subgroup of youth that live in group homes, and those are the ones you want to study. So we might use purposive sampling and just choose the ones that have this unique characteristic. Okay, so it's hand picking a sample. Okay, next slide. The next one we're going to talk about is quota sampling. This is where you begin with a matrix that describes the population. So you make a table and you say, what are the characteristics that I want to study or that this group has that I should include? And you list them out and then you say, well, what is the proportion of the population that has that? And you figure out what that percentage is. And then you select the amount of people with those characteristics based on that percentage that you decided was the proportion of the population, because you want to make sure and get that represented. Sometimes you can use quota sampling for oversampling also. In my dissertation, I did a secondary data analysis, which means that the data had already been collected. The U.S. federal government collected data on foster kids across the country, and then I did my study. I analyzed the data and chose the variables. They over-selected infants, because in the foster care system, the number of infants in the system is very low. But they wanted to make sure we had enough so that you could run statistics and say something and predict something about infants. So instead of having 5% of the children be infants, which is probably closer to reality, they decided to sample 10%. So they used this quota sampling when it came to infants. Okay, the next one is snowball sampling. This one we use for special populations that are difficult to find. And what you do is you start with one person, and let's say you interview them, and then at the end of the interview you say, do you know any other people who also might be willing to let me interview them that also have this issue? And they help you find another person. And then you interview them, and then you say, do you know another person? And then it keeps going until you get how many people you want in your sample. Okay, a special note about qualitative studies. In a qualitative study, someone who is willing to talk about their group, the group that they belong to, is called an informant. And when you interview or speak with an informant, you really want to make sure that they're typical of that group and that there isn't something unique about them that is making them want to talk to you. Otherwise your sample, or excuse me, your study will be biased. Okay? Okay, I'm going to stop this and we'll start probability on the next video.